Commander, you'll want to see this right now, Jonah Pike said, his hands clamped white-knuckled on the rail of the telemetry pit. His tone cut through the background chatter of consoles and alerts. Commander Darren Vale crossed the deck of the Lunar Defense Fleet's command center in 3 strides, boots hitting the composite flooring with a measured rhythm. The men and women on shift turned their eyes toward him, as if his presence might steady the instruments themselves. He stopped behind Pike, whose station was awash with crimson markers on a laser plasma display that pulsed with unfamiliar waveforms. "What am I looking at?" Vale asked, keeping his voice flat, though the thrum of unease in the room told him this wasn't routine. "It came from the bunker under Shackleton Crater," Pike replied, his throat working as he swallowed dry air. "Dead installation since before my father was born, but it just spoke. Signal burst, broadband sweep, then narrowed to a code signature." He stabbed a finger at the shifting graphs. "I cross-referenced twice before I called you. It matches the Founder's grammar." The deck felt colder, though Vale knew the thermal regulators kept conditions steady. His eyes stayed on the jagged lines burning across the display. The Founder's code was the phantom language of a species long gone, the scaffolding of every advanced system in known space. No human ship should have been able to produce it. Yet there it was, carved into the silence like a flare across history. "Lock this down," Vale ordered. "Nobody outside this room breathes a word. Pike, duplicate to isolated cores and cut uplinks. I want this sealed." "Aye, sir." Pike's hands flew, severing network pathways until the console stood alone. Admiral Holtz's face appeared on a wall-mounted heads-up display a moment later, his jaw clenched, eyes narrowed. "I've already got half the outer probes screaming at us. Long-range monitors picked up the same emission. We're flagged across every listening post between Neptune and Proxima. You know what this means." "They'll assume we cracked the code," Vale said. "They won't assume, Commander. They'll act. Rivalries won't save you this time. Every empire out there thinks if we've weaponized Founder's language, the only solution is to bury us under their fleets." Holtz leaned closer to the pickup, lines deepening around his mouth. "Diplomacy won't stall them. You've got days at best." The deck crew stilled. The only sound was the rustle of uniforms as officers leaned in toward their stations, waiting for the next order. Vale straightened, hands clasped behind his back, eyes sweeping the deck. "Shut down civilian channels. Move traffic to hardened lines. Recon teams to the Shackleton site. Full security cordon. I want ground confirmation." He looked at Pike. "You stay on it. If there's another burst, I want analysis before it finishes. Leaving the crater." "Yes, sir." Pike's voice cracked, but he steadied it as he bent to his controls. The command deck smelled faintly of recycled air and lubricant from the ventilation seals, the taste of metal lingering at the back of Vale's throat. He focused on the physical sensations, the cool grip of the console edge beneath his palm, the low vibration running through the deck from stabilizers, because those were real. The rest, the notion that humanity might have stirred something buried since the Cold War, felt like a story told to frightened cadets. Yet the signal was real enough to call half a dozen hostile navies toward Seoul. A junior officer lifted her head from a console. "Commander, external traffic confirms an increase in chatter from Arcan and Tureth listening posts. Looks like coordinated movement." "Already?" Vale muttered. He turned back toward Holtz's image. "You said days. I think we'll have hours." Holtz rubbed at his temple. "Then keep that bunker sealed. If it transmits again before we know what it does, you won't be facing probes. You'll be facing fleets." The channel cut, leaving the heads-up display dark. Vale stood silent for a heartbeat, letting the weight settle across his chest. Outgunned, undermanned, holding a line that had never been tested against the scale of force barreling in from the dark. He turned toward his officers. "We hold this line until we understand what we've touched. Lock the decks. No transmissions leave Luna without my authorization. This stays here." Orders rippled outward, and the deck filled with clipped confirmations. He made his way down into the lower bay, where equipment racks hummed with power conversion cycles. Engineers swarmed around transport crates, hauling out sensor packages and sealed packs of excavation gear. The air carried a tang of coolant and polymer dust that clung to the tongue. Batra, the chief engineer, jogged up beside him, grease smearing his forearms. "You heard?" Vale asked. Half the deck's buzzing, Batra said grimly. If the array down there is what Pike thinks it is, we'll need time to even get close to stable readouts. And time's the one thing you don't have. Recon first, Vale said. I want eyes and ears in that bunker before anyone touches a relay. Send Rask's Marines in with you. You think we'll find company? Batra asked. I think if a signal that loud lit up from our backyard, someone out there already knows exactly where to aim their scopes, Vale replied. Above them, klaxons wailed once before cutting to silence, signaling the start of blackout protocols. Every external light beyond the base went dark to reduce the station's signature. The sensation was like pulling a blanket over your head, knowing predators still circled. Vale moved back toward the lift. As the doors sealed, he let the silence wrap around him, broken only by the buzz of electronics in the panel. He pictured the fleets out there, their admirals already calculating strike vectors, deciding whether to unite long enough to crush humanity's one audacious claim at parity. When the lift opened, the corridor smelled faintly of heated wiring and stale air from sealed vents. Marines in full kit were already lining up, rifles slung, helmets sealed. Major Quinn Rask adjusted his gauntlets and looked up as Vale approached. We're running escort for the engineers, Rask said. Crater's deep. If anyone else is sniffing around, we'll flush them. Don't take chances, Vale said. We don't know what's in there, and I won't lose men before the real fight even reaches us. Rask gave a curt nod, his visor reflecting the red strip lighting as the squad moved out. Back in command, Vale watched on the plasma display as their transport skimmed over crater ridges. Dust plumes rose in silent arcs as landing struts touched regolith. The feeds shook with every impact of boots on lunar rock, and the camera lens glittered with fine grains of dust scattering under search lamps. Inside the command deck, the atmosphere was taut enough to make every shift of fabric, every cough, every click of a relay feel magnified. The officers glanced at Vale in brief, nervous intervals. He kept his gaze on the screens, jaw tight, waiting. Pike's console chirped. Commander, incoming, he said, voice unsteady. Listening arrays confirm spikes from 3 alien relays, all vectoring in. They're triangulating the crater's coordinates. The blood rushed in Vale's ears, steady and heavy. He didn't let it show. Then the clock has started, he said evenly. We hold this until we understand what we've unearthed. From this moment on, the moon is the line. The deck fell quiet, not with fear, but with the sharp stillness of people realizing history had just tilted beneath their feet. Seal the grid, Arun. Everything not mission critical goes dark, Vale said, striding into engineering. Isolate now. Chief Engineer Aaron Batra slid from an open panel, eyes red, forearms streaked with grease. We can black out civilian loops in 10, he said. Touch the trunk lines and farms, clinics, and dorms flicker. People will lose their heads. Better a scare than a crater, Vale answered. Show me Shackleton. Batra led him down a narrow corridor. Air tasted dry, tinged with hot plastic and solvent. Floor plates trembled as cranes moved cargo in the bay. 2 Marines guarded a reinforced hatch. Batra keyed the seal. The door parted. Inside, racks crowded the chamber around a coffin-length console wrapped in ceramic shielding. Braided cables crossed the deck. A laser plasma display painted ripple maps across the console face. That's the Archimedes array interface, Batra said. Legacy transmitter tied to buried plates under the crater. Built from code scraps we intercepted decades ago. Not a cannon. It talks at the layer our enemies use to coordinate their fleets. Ask the wrong thing, and ships far away will hear it. How much power? Vale asked. Enough to cook anything old, Batra replied. Feed it from mains and early converters will burn. The surge crawls every unshielded cable. We'll need Faraday shutters around this vault, hard air gaps at each junction, and a dedicated loop with mechanical breakers. Anything from the first colonization push gets unplugged and walked into shielded cages. Vale set his palm on the ceramic shell. The casing felt colder than the room, smooth and unyielding. Can we test without ringing every probe from here to Neptune? We can shape a whisper, Batra said. Short burst, narrow band. But the moment we energize those plates, foreign monitors will feel ground tremors and tighten formation. A heads-up display on the wall flickered to life. Admiral Holtz appeared, jaw tight. Commander, I need a posture message now. Offer verification teams, Supervised access, a corridor for inspection. Looking cooperative might buy time. If we transmit anything, every relay will announce where to aim, Vale replied. They aren't listening for comfort, they're staging. Duran, if you light that machine without signaling restraint, they'll read it as a strike. Holtz pressed. Give me a statement. Tell them we're isolating infrastructure to prevent collateral damage from foreign interference, Vale said. True and useless. Holtz's mouth flattened. The assembly wants oversight. Send them forms, Vale answered, cutting the channel. He nodded to Batra. Safeguards. Batra squared his shoulders. Step 1. Spin down non-essential grids. 2. Detach domes and hab blocks from mains. Switch to local storage. 3. Drop Faraday shutters on the vault and switching yards. 4. Pull legacy satellites offline. Purge caches. Tag transmitters with physical locks. 5. Evacuate every instrument that can't survive a surge to shielded lockers. 6. Assign runners to carry parts because lifts will be intermittent. Timeline? 4 hours if nothing breaks, Batra said. 8 if people argue. You have 2, Vale said. I'll clear the lanes. They moved through service ways where crews dragged cages on squealing wheels. Hot rubber scented the air. A medic pushed an equipment cart, the cabinet doors clattering over seams in the deck. The station felt like a household packing under deadline. Every corner stacked, every face tight with purpose. Forklifts beeped in the bay, and coolant dripped from a cracked hose onto gritted steel. Someone cursed as a panel slipped. Vale stepped onto command. The chill of recycled atmosphere cooled sweat on his neck. Laser plasma displays burned across watchstanders' faces. Jonah Pike leaned into his console, eyes locked to a cascade of timing bands. 3. Coalitions are trading coordinates, Pike reported. Their windows are tightening. How fast? Hours, maybe less if their vanguards are already at Neptune. Begin isolation, Vale ordered. Old lines first. Announce drills. Keep language calm. Move families. Don't invite calls home. Deck lights dimmed in stages as circuits peeled away. Shutters dropped in distant corridors with blunt impacts, followed by the hiss of sealing gaskets. Men glanced up, traded quick looks, then returned to work with hands moving faster than their voices. Major Quinn Rask arrived with dust on his knees and a rip down one sleeve. Perimeter around Shackleton is up, he said. Tripwires planted. Any rover, not ours, gets warned once, then stopped. Keep a direct line to Batra, Vale said. If engineering calls, your squads carry. Rask nodded and left at a trot. Holtz reappeared on a heads-up panel, color washed out by glare. The assembly voted, he said. Cease activation until after joint talks. Talks begin when carriers sit inside Jupiter's orbit, Vale answered. He kept his tone even. If I wait, the only choice left is crater shape. Holtz stared for a long breath. Then you're committing Luna to a stand. Every action reads as final. We crossed that line the moment the ground spoke, Vale said. The panel went dark. Batra's voice came through local. Shutters dropping now. In engineering, heavy plates slammed into place around the vault. Static crackled along seams, raising hairs on forearms. Breaker frames set, cutting the last tie to mains. Status bars crawled across the primary display, while officers called power levels, thermal loads, evacuation confirms. A crate rolled into a corner. Loose tools clicked inside with each jolt. The lift shaft breathed warm air, carrying the scent of hot bearings. Commander, Pike said softly, eyes never leaving the graph. Foreign windows just narrowed again. Cooperation born of fear. That means early fire. Then we'll be early, Vale replied. He studied the overhead map. Luna, a scarred disk. Shackleton, a dark mouth near the rim. Preparing the array wasn't a hedge anymore. Once shutters fell and the grid broke into islands, retreat meant tearing apart our own work. He closed his fingers around the rail, felt cold bite through skin, and spoke so every man on deck could hear. We make this place hard to kill, he said. Carry on. Contact pattern just changed, Jonah Pike said, voice clipped, eyes locked on his laser plasma display. Multiple fleets adjusting vectors together. Rival banners, but they're moving as one. Commander Duran Vale crossed the command deck in 3 strides, boots hitting steel plates with a sharp cadence. The air carried the tang of recycled coolant and sweat from hours of work under failing vents. He leaned over Pike's shoulder. The display painted a lattice of shifting vectors, war groups from houses that had spent decades gutting each other, now folding into an unnatural alignment. They shouldn't even be in the same corridor, Pike muttered. Yet they're flying in formation. They've decided fear of us weighs more than hate for each other, Vale said flatly. He straightened, the glow from the display cutting deep shadows across his face. Coalition of rivals is the ugliest beast, because it starves only when the target dies. Major Quinn Rask entered from the lift, dust streaking his uniform. Recon relays confirm it. Multiple empires are sharing telemetry. They've agreed on strike authority. If Earth transmits again, they're cleared to attack. His jaw flexed as he added, "We're the tripwire." A murmur passed across the deck, boots shifting, breath catching. Pike's hand trembled against the console until he clenched it into a fist. Vale raised his voice, cutting through the quiet. "Then we make their doubt heavier than their rage. Disperse assets. Every habitat tether launches decoy pallets. Seed them across corridors. CIWS corridors pre-aimed. Rask, your people will mask the patterns. They'll strike shadows and waste ammunition." "Understood," Rask said. His tone carried no bravado, only grim acceptance. He pivoted and left, already barking orders into his comm. Batra's voice crackled from engineering. "Commander, array is caged and ready, but we should test fire. See if shutters hold and breakers trip clean. Small pulse, nothing broad." Vale considered. The deck smelled faintly of scorched insulation where a board had blown earlier. It was the scent of machines pushed beyond comfort. "Do it, but keep it short." Down in the vault, Batra and his crew stripped sweat into their collars. They braced while relays clacked. Coils sang. The array throbbed once, an inaudible pressure that prickled skin and lifted every hair along forearms. On command, the displays stuttered. Outside, two derelict Terran satellites, long-dead husks, suddenly bloomed with blue arcs before tearing apart like brittle fruit. Shards glittered briefly before tumbling away. Jonah Pike flinched at the feed. "Those birds weren't even active, and they still cooked." Batra's tone came heavy. "That was a whisper, Commander. One microburst. Anything not hardened will fry." Vale felt the chill of understanding spread through the room. A weapon that could melt enemies would torch their own history just as easily. Then discipline is survival, not a jewel wasted without my order. Every trigger weighed like blood. Holtz's face filled a heads-up panel, features drawn tight. "You fired it?" His voice carried accusation and fear. "We tested shutters," Vale answered. "Result, 2 ancient Terran husks gone. Proof the risk is real. You just showed every rival exactly what they feared." Holtz's breath came ragged. "They'll tighten, ranks further." "Good," Vale said. "Fear keeps them cautious." Holtz shook his head. "It also unites them. Coalition law now has teeth. Any further signal, they'll strike with full consensus." "Then silence is our shield," Vale replied. He cut the channel before Holtz could argue more. On deck, Pike whispered, "We've made ourselves the storm in their nursery tales." Vale walked to the viewport. Beyond the thick glass, Earth glowed blue-white, framed against black. His own reflection stared back at him, tired eyes beneath a brow streaked with tension. The decks behind him still rattled with activity, Marines moving crates, technicians soldering, operators calling timings. Each sound blended into the rhythm of a colony holding its breath. He turned. "Jonah, spread the pallets. Make each one scream like an active relay. Let them chase ghosts." "Yes, sir," Pike answered, already keying sequences. A young comm tech at the corner console raised her hand, hesitant. "Commander, my brother works maintenance on one of the old sats. He always said they'd outlive him. Now they're gone." Vale stepped closer. Her eyes glistened under the plasma glow. "Your brother served with pride if he maintained those relics. They bore witness, but their end warned us in time. You tell him his work saved us by proving the array's teeth." The tech blinked fast, nodding, breath shaky but steadier. Batra chimed in again, voice low. "Commander, the array drew power from reserves faster than projection. We can't repeat bursts often. Every surge eats the grid alive. How long to recover from one pulse? Vale asked. 2 hours minimum, Batra said. Each time we fire, more circuits blacken. We'll be trimming ourselves leaner. Vale tightened his grip on the rail. Then we fire only to survive, never to posture. Not again. Across the deck, Rask returned, face hard but eyes alive. Decoys deployed. Enemy patrols already scanning false trails. If they bite, they'll see a dozen phantom arrays. Keep them hunting, Vale said. Jonah lifted his head. Coalition warships are slowing, almost like they're whispering to each other. Cautious. They know we can hurt them, but they know we can't do it often. That balance is all we need, Vale said. We live in their doubt. The deck lights flickered once as another breaker cycled. The sound of coolant pumps, the thud of sealed shutters, the hiss of pressured doors, all merged into the heartbeat of Luna girding itself. Crews moved with sharper focus. Even fear found direction. Vale watched his people work, each hand steady despite what waited beyond orbit. His own chest felt weighted, but inside that weight burned clarity. The array was power and peril, shield and coffin. It would decide who endured the coalition's fear. He spoke into the command channel, his words measured and firm. We've shown them the cost. From now on, every watt counts. Hold discipline. Carry the burden together. The array is not our weapon. It is our last oath. The deck answered with silence, tight, resolved, unbroken. In that silence lived the promise that Luna would not kneel, even if it cracked. And above, in cold corridors of space, rival banners fluttered closer, drawn by fear, tethered by suspicion, yet bound in common cause against a single target. The anomaly that dared answer back. Contact count just doubled, shouted Lieutenant Sarah, her voice rising above the clatter of shifting consoles. Fingers flew across the interface, dragging telemetry feeds onto a heads-up window. Coalition strike echelons emerging past Neptune's shadow. Multiple banners, one rhythm. Commander Vale pivoted from the central rail, boots striking with clipped finality. The glow of the laser plasma displays etched his cheekbones in violent blue light. They've tightened formation earlier than expected, he said. His words carried the weight of an unwanted inevitability. Across the deck, Pike wiped condensation from his visor plate, leaving streaks that caught the light. Their scouts are riding hot with jammers. They're flooding the corridors with static, like blind men shouting so we can't see which step comes next. Vale's brow tightened. They fear another pulse. They advance in noise to smother echoes. From the comm pit, Rask reported, voice gravelly from hours of command drills. Terran pickets confirmed the sightings. Our screen at the outer edge tracked 30 hulls, then lost half in static wash. But routing suggests they're pulling reinforcements behind the leading wave. The deck seemed to stiffen as each operator leaned forward, ears catching the brittle crack of distant relays, straining under interference. Smells of hot circuitry mixed with the mineral bite of coolant seeping from an overworked valve. Holtz's image flared onto the nearest panel, eyes dark and restless. We cannot let this escalate unchecked, he said, leaning so close his face blurred in pixels. A single broadcast, Commander. A ceasefire call. Show them we are not aggressors. Vale's jaw set. Broadcast is surrender. Every pulse of signal is target paint for their coalition. You'd hand them a map to our heart. You'd rather risk annihilation, Holtz shot back. Fear binds them now. Diplomacy can unbind them. They've written their covenant already, Vale growled. If Earth transmits again, they strike. Any message you propose is the rope we hang from. Operators turned slightly, listening while keeping their hands in motion. The tension in the air pressed against eardrums, a reminder that words here weighed heavier than steel. Pike broke the silence. We've seeded ghost traffic along the outer belts, false convoys moving at drift speed. If their jammers choke our eyes, we'll choke theirs with lies. Good, Vale said. Layer it. Let them chase whispers. Every phantom target buys us minutes. Sarah's screen pulsed. First echelon veering around Neptune's magnetosphere. Their comms bounced distorted. They're cautious, like they're circling a minefield. Rask rubbed his temples, then barked orders into his link. Deploy more decoy pallets along the blue corridor. Make each one pulse like a live feed. If they want to sniff, Let them drown in perfume. The deck vibrated as pallets launched, a bass thump that reverberated through boots. Operators smelled ionized dust from the seals as panels cracked open to release the swarms. Each crewman felt it differently. Tingle across teeth, a flutter in the chest, a weight pressing on the bridge of the nose. Holtz's voice intruded again, more desperate now. You are gambling the colony's survival on shadows and tricks. Do you not see? A single phrase of peace could unravel their unity. Vale turned toward the panel, eyes glinting like flint. And the instant we speak, the coalition calls it proof of threat. They attack not because we broadcast war, but because we broadcast it all. You want a truce, Minister? Then keep your silence. It's our only treaty left. Holtz's lips thinned, but he vanished from the feed without reply. The silence that followed was broken by Sarah. Outer screen reports enemy cutting drive signatures. They're drifting with cold hulls, trying to slide beneath detection arcs. Rask grimaced. Predators stalking. They hope to trigger a reaction without showing teeth. Then feed them phantoms, Vale ordered. Jonah, route telemetry from dead satellites. Make their shadows scream like armed frigates. Pike grinned, sharp and weary. On it. We'll haunt their boards with ghosts of ships long gone. His fingers tapped rapid sequences. False data cascaded across channels, painting corridors with fleets that never existed. In the far corner, a young technician dropped a tool. The clang against the deck rang like a gunshot. Everyone's shoulders flinched. She muttered an apology, cheeks flushing, but Vale caught her eye. You're not alone, he told her, voice steady. Every mistake is ours to share. Every burden carried together. Her lips pressed tight, and she nodded, steadied by the commander's unshaken tone. Minutes stretched. The displays pulsed with enemy vectors, shifting like currents around reefs. Smells of oil, sweat, and recycled air layered over the taste of copper on the tongue. Each heartbeat on deck matched the slow tick of relays switching under stress. Finally, Rask spoke again. Coalition echelons closing gap, timetable compressing. If they cross into the inner arc, activation becomes mandatory. Vale ran a hand across the rail, fingertips catching on small scars in the steel, each one a memory of past strikes endured. Then we stand at Neptune's tripwire, he said softly. Yet every ear caught it. Sarah's throat worked as she swallowed. Sir, when the array fires again, what happens to us? Vale looked around the deck. Faces young and old stared back, eyes wide but refusing to look away. He let the weight settle before speaking. When it fires, some circuits will burn. Some shields may fail. But if we time it right, their coalition stalls long enough for us to hold. We are not aiming for victory, only survival until choice returns. The words were not heroic. They were honest. And because they were honest, the crew drew strength. Shoulders squared, hands steadied. Jonah lifted his head from the console. Commander, telemetry ghosts are working. Coalition patrols are scattering sensors, chasing echoes. They've lost confidence in their own readings. Good, Vale said. Let doubt be their leash. The lights flickered once, breakers groaning. The scent of hot insulation teased the air again. Crew coughed lightly, waved it off, kept working. In the viewport, Neptune's blue storm loomed, its whirling clouds like an ancient sentinel. Against its horizon, distant ships glinted, moving ever closer in deadly unity. Vale pressed his palm against the glass, feeling its cold bite through his glove. Every false trail buys time, he whispered to himself. Then louder, for all, hold steady. The longer they fear what they don't understand, the longer we breathe. Behind him, the deck came alive with murmurs of assent. Ghost traffic swirled in the dark, coalition fleets prowled with caution, and Luna's defenders prepared for the moment when silence would shatter and the array's fire would decide whether they endured or fell. Commander, I've cracked the pattern! Pike's exclamation cut across the command deck, sharp enough to silence every conversation. His hands trembled as he dragged glowing lines across the laser plasma display, shapes unfolding into rhythmic pulses of light. Vale strode over, boots clicking on the grated floor, his expression a taut mask. Show me. Pike zoomed the diagram outward, revealing lattice-like structures built of shifting glyphs and numbers. It isn't noise, it's grammar. Their fleet coordination pulses follow the same recursive nesting as the founder relics buried beneath Tycho crater. They don't just command through data, they sing in a dead language, one that we've only seen carved into ruins. Rask frowned, leaning in with a grunt. You're telling me alien war fleets coordinate with ancient Earth fossils? That's a stretch, Jonah. Pike snapped back, his voice cracking under adrenaline. Not fossils, architectures. The founders used recursive code structures mirrored in stone. The Coalition's fleets echo those sequences when sinking faster than light nodes. Watch this. He overlaid Terran intercept logs against the alien glyphs, and the deck gasped as the patterns aligned in a living rhythm, alien maneuvers, snapping into recognizable cadence. Sarah pressed her palm against her mouth. It's like watching a chant made into light. Vale's eyes narrowed. If their command lattice is this exposed, can we touch it? That was when Chief Engineer Batra emerged from the lower pit, grease streaking his jaw like war paint. We can do more than touch it, he said, his deep voice carrying steady authority. He laid a wrench across the console like an offering. Their synchronization ticks at intervals tied to their FTL cycle harmonics. If we inject pulses in the gaps, tuned to their chant, we fracture the rhythm. It's like tripping a dancer mid-step. Their formation crumbles. Pike's face flushed with vindication. Yes, exactly, a pulsed injection keyed into their cycle, but it has to hit at the heartbeat of the sequence. Not before, not after. Batra jabbed a finger at the chart. That means short windows, milliseconds. Our power grids aren't designed for that kind of flex. We risk throwing sparks into every civilian net on Earth. Rask growled low. You mean lights go out from Cairo to Sao Paulo? Worse, Batra admitted. Ripple feedback into hospitals, food lines, life support. We could cripple our own people while blinding our enemy. The deck fell into a heavy stillness, pierced only by the whir of cooling fans and the staccato tapping of keys. Operators glanced at one another, weighing the invisible lives behind the decision. Holtz's image flickered onto the secondary screen, uninvited, face pale and drawn. You cannot entertain this madness. A power lash like that strikes our children first. You speak of strategy while the veins of our planet bleed dry. Vale turned slowly, his shoulders broad under the harsh lights. And if we don't strike, Minister? Their coalition surrounds Neptune now, binding us tighter by the hour. What future do your children hold when the sky itself burns? Holtz's eyes darted, his breath quick. Then talk to them. Speak in the language you've uncovered. Show them we share kinship with their founders. Pike slammed a hand against the rail. That's suicide. The Coalition decreed, if Earth speaks again, they unleash their full arsenal. Our signal, however dressed, would be the spark they wait for. Holtz's mouth opened, but no words came. He vanished from the feed, leaving only a black screen where his eyes had pleaded. Vale exhaled slowly, the sound rasping against clenched teeth. He looked at each officer in turn, reading the lines etched into their faces by fatigue, fear, and duty. If we proceed, we need drills, total isolation, mainland power grids cut clean from array injection nodes. That buys safety if the separation holds. Batra nodded grimly. I can reroute the couplers, but it means hours of blackout. Cities will panic. We'll need civil order squads active. Rask barked. Order collapses without lights. You better warn them before we pull the cord. No warnings, Vale countered. Preparation, yes. Leaks, number. If panic races ahead of blackout, we lose control before we act. Drill the crews quietly, block by block. Sarah's voice wavered, but she pressed on. And when it comes time, who gives the strike order? Every gaze turned toward Vale. He felt their weight press into his chest like stone. The command rail beneath his palms seemed colder than before, the texture rough against skin worn raw from long nights. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a heartbeat, remembering his daughter's laugh before the war began. Then he signed his name onto the arming board. Red tags flickered across the displays as safeties disengaged, one after another. Each click resounded through the deck like a drumbeat, final and irreversible. Jonah Pike whispered, voice breaking with awe. We hold the keys to their tongue, Vale answered, low but resolute, and with it, the burden to silence or destroy. The deck vibrated as isolation switches rolled across Earth's power grids. In the distance, alarms rang through buried cables, relays snapping open like bones breaking. Operators smelled the tang of heated copper, sharp and invasive, carried through the vents. A faint taste of salt reached Sarah's lips, sweat rising as she realized the signal path now led only one way. Batra leaned close to Vale. Windows will come fast. The array won't forgive hesitation. Once armed, it waits for nothing. Rask wiped his brow, muttering, "Then we better not blink." The crew gathered tighter around the displays, eyes fixed on the alien lattice, scrolling across screens like an ancient hymn resurrected. They could hear their own breathing loud in their ears, the scrape of fabric against consoles, the subtle groan of hull struts carrying the strain of anticipation. Vale lifted his head, voice carrying over the silence. From this moment, we aim not at ships, but at the heartbeat of their unity. If we cut that, they fracture. And if we miss, his gaze lingered, sharp as glass. Then history ends with us. Sarah swallowed hard, her voice a whisper barely audible. Then we cannot miss. The coalition fleets glinted faintly against Neptune's storm, unknowingly marching to rhythms encoded long before Terran civilization crawled upright. And deep within the array's chambers, coils awakened, charged not with sound or flame, but with the resurrected syntax of a forgotten race, ready to speak in thunder where humans dared not whisper. The moment had come where language itself would decide survival, and with every red tag switch, Earth leaned closer to unleashing words older than memory, sharpened now into weapons that could either save or consume them all. Contact incoming, Vanguard strike inbound. The tactical officer's voice cracked through the bridge of Resolute, cutting away every remnant of quiet. The main laser, plasma display erupted with streaking vectors. Red spears curved toward Earth's outer bastions, and before anyone could breathe, the first line of orbital sentries blossomed into fire. The impact flashed bright enough to etch afterimages on the crew's retinas. Vale clutched the rail, barked orders. Seal shutters, shift reserves to dorsal plating, report damage as it lands. His throat felt raw, as if the enemy barrage had scraped it clean. The ship lurched sideways. A thundering crack reverberated along the frame. Lights above guttered, showering sparks. The tang of scorched insulation filled the air as consoles hissed and sputtered. Crew staggered, some slamming into bulkheads, teeth clicking from the force. "Breach on deck 7! Hull venting!" a lieutenant shouted over the chaos, voice strangled by static from her headset. "Get casualty control down there," Vale snapped, though his own vision blurred from the jolt. He tasted copper, realizing his lip had split open. Across the deck, Sarah gripped her chair with both hands, skin pale under the flicker of warning lights. "Their aim is surgical," she gasped, sweat trailing down her neck. "They're cutting our eyes and ears before we can raise the array fully." "Then blind them back," Vale answered through clenched teeth. "Feed false telemetry. Make them chase ghosts." On the ground beneath the lunar crust, Rask's Marines moved through choking dust. Alarms echoed through cavern halls, bouncing like rolling drums. "Lock down every choke point," he roared, helmet amplifiers carrying his order through the tunnels. "No one touches the array without bleeding for it." They stacked sandbags, drove anchors into basalt, welded firing slits into old mining shafts. The tang of ionized dust clung to their tongues. Each soldier's armor scraped against stone as they crouched into positions, rifles cradled with white-knuckle grip. Above, destroyers threw themselves into the storm. Captain Dorian's ship, Horizon Pike, swung broadside to intercept a wave of coalition torpedoes. The crew barely had time to breathe before light lanced across their hull. The bridge cracked open like brittle glass. The vessel's dying pulse lit the sky for seconds, and then it was gone. Sarah covered her mouth, whispering, "They're burning themselves alive to hold lanes open." Batra's voice cut in, rough and unwavering. "Every second bought up there is a breath for us down here. Keep their rhythm locked." Another shock rattled Resolute, sending half the deck tumbling. Monitors crashed to the floor, glass shards crunching under boots. Smoke curled, stinging eyes making each inhale ache. An ensign shouted hoarsely, "Casualties climbing, Commander. Dozens injured, multiple trapped behind sealed bulkheads." "Cut through if you must," Vale ordered. "Nobody left to suffocate." His jaw clenched so tight the muscles ached. Pike staggered to his console, one eye swelling shut from a gash. He hammered in data with bloodied fingers. "The lattice is still open. Their coordination pulses. It's holding, but just barely. If we can drive the injection now, we fracture them before they adapt." "Not yet," Vale said, shaking his head. "We wait until the array reaches peak charge. We fire early, we waste everything." The words barely left his mouth before another barrage struck. The deck tilted violently. A crewman screamed as he slid across the floor, hitting a spar that snapped bone. Emergency lights painted the room in red. The vibration made every tooth in Sarah's skull ache. "At this rate, Commander, we'll have nothing left when it peaks," she cried out. Vale forced his gaze to the viewport. Beyond the fractured shields, he saw human destroyers scatter, weaving suicide paths to draw fire. Each flare of death was another moment earned. His throat tightened as he realized every lost ship was a stone on the scale, tipping history. "Marines to array tunnels," Rask's voice thundered through comms. "Contact expected within minutes. Coalition drones tunneling through crater ridges." The sound of gunfire filtered in, sharp and unrelenting, mixed with muffled shouts and the clatter of debris. Batra looked up from his panel, sweat glistening on his brow. "Array at 75% charge, circuit straining, one overload, and she cooks herself inside out." "Hold her steady," Vale growled. "We didn't carve her out of stone to watch her die silent." On Deck 7, casualty control crews dragged wounded through smoke, coughing into masks, eyes red from heat. A child's photo fluttered loose from someone's locker, drifting through the corridor until flame ate its corner. The image curled black as more bodies were lifted past. Pike slammed his palm against the edge of the console, knuckles splitting. "If they learn what we're doing, they'll flood everything with counter-harmonics. We must strike in the gap. This chance won't repeat." Vale's eyes burned, but not from the smoke. He stared hard at the enemy vectors closing in on the array's shield line. "We will strike, Jonah, but timing decides whether it's salvation or our tomb." Another Terran destroyer erupted outside, shockwaves slamming Resolute sideways. A shower of sparks cascaded down, crackling across wet decks where firefighting foam still clung. The acrid bite of burning polymers filled every lung. Sarah steadied herself with both hands, her nails cutting into the railing. "Every destroyer gone is another cut into our marrow." "Each sacrifice carves a path for us to swing the blade," Vale replied, voice low, deliberate. "And we will swing it." Batra's console shrieked alarms. 90% charge! Coils redlining!" Rask's transmission rattled in through static, loud with rifle fire in the background. "We're holding them. For now. Mine, boys are bleeding in the tunnels. You better make this damn shot worth every drop." The array's deep core rumbled, vibrations carrying up through stone and steel. Crew felt it in their bones, a subterranean throb that rattled teeth and pressed on eardrums. The sound was alien, old, almost like a buried cathedral waking. Pike's eyes widened. The sequence is stabilizing. One more cycle, then the language speaks with our tongue. The ship groaned again under another hit, hull screaming as if alive. Vale raised his voice above the chaos, sharp and cutting. "All crews, stand ready. This is the window carved by their sacrifice. The array will sing through us. We will make it heard." Outside, Earth's defenders continued to fall, one after another, bodies in steel burning in silence across the black. And in that sacrifice, a narrow seam opened, a sliver of time where humanity's hand gripped the throat of history, ready to tear or to be torn apart. "Fire on my mark. 3, 2, 1, Vale said, and his hand came down like a gavel. Deep under Shackleton's rim, breakers slammed shut and the array answered, not with sound but with a pressure that rolled through bone and teeth. Lights flared, dimmed, then leveled. Every hair on forearms rose as if a storm had walked through the decks. On the bridge of Resolute, The laser plasma display erupted, clean bands of code pulsing outward from Luna in concentric rings. Jonah Pike's fingers hovered over his keys, eyes wide, throat working as the first return arrived. It hit like a tide. Enemy formation glyphs stuttered, then shattered into pools of noise. Around them, consoles hissed as capacitors dumped heat. The air tasted like hot copper and recycled sweat. An officer gagged behind a sleeve, forced a breath, and went back to work. Pike's voice wavered, then steadied. Impact confirmed across Coalition sync layers. Their FTL lattice, it's skipping beats. Look. He drove a sequence across the screen. Where enemy vectors had marched in lockstep, they now drifted. Triangle wedges broken into crooked lines. Timing marks smeared into ash-gray smudges. Targeting relays are blinking out in chains. They can't hold alignment. Sarah gripped the rail so hard knuckles blanched. Multiple capital ships losing engine timing. Heat signatures spike, then fall off. I'm seeing course corrections that don't complete. One cruiser yawed mid-burn, its plumes sputtering, nose dipping as if the pilot had lost balance. Another slewed across a lane and clipped a wingman. Both tumbled, flaring like magnesium in low gravity before rolling into darkness. The deck crew didn't cheer. They watched, absorbing the knowledge that a message had torn more steel than any cannon could. From the array vault, Batra's voice came through rough and breathless. Coil's holding, but it's like wrestling a kiln with bare hands down here. I need cool down or we weld the guts into a single lump. Behind his words, metal sang under strain, and men shouted checklists through dry throats. Vale nodded once, even though Batra couldn't see it. Understood. Jonah, status on our own networks. Earth native system steady, Pike said, rubbing the swelling around his eyebrow, where a cut had sealed into a crust. Local control intact. Some latency spikes. We lost 3 minor relays that were older than I am. Everything else is riding the wave. A Comtech half-Vale's age whispered, eyes wet and shining. Are we winning? The question hung in the air like a wounded thing. We're breathing, Vale replied, and that was enough to make hands move again. Rask came on from the tunnels, rifle fire snapping close to his mic. Drop pod timings went to hell. Their drones landed out of sequence and tried to burrow into different access points at once. We're picking them off in batches. The array woke something ugly in their heads, Commander. They're confused and mean, but they're not marching together. Seal what you can, Vale said. Gamble nothing. If a corridor falls, collapse it and make another. On the main plot, Coalition comms went from disciplined bursts to chopped fragments that stopped mid-packet. Encrypted nets slurred into static. Ships that had spoken with one voice now muttered alone. Pike dragged a listening window across bands of spectrum and shook his head. Their message layers are still encrypted, but the relay chain carrying those locks is out of step. They're talking into a wind that shreds every word. Holtz blinked onto a heads-up panel, this time not with orders but with a face caught between awe and terror. What have you done, Darren? He asked, breath uneven. It's like watching gods forget their names. We reminded them their unity had a heartbeat, Vale said. Then we put a hand on its throat. Push the advantage, Rask urged, voice echoing under stone and dust. I can feel them falter. Give me artillery in the upper shafts, and I'll turn their confusion into a grave. Negative, Vale answered, cutting that momentum with a blade. Opportunistic strikes only. Conserve ammunition. We don't chase. We cut what reaches for us. He turned to gunnery. Pick the ones pointing at hospitals, food farms, lift hubs. Make each shot count. Gunners bent to their sights. The ship's starboard batteries coughed, and a line frigate that had tried to angle a lance toward a civilian transit ring evaporated. Plates peeling back like petals turned to ash. Another coalition ship rolled aimlessly, venting vapor and crew in a shimmering veil that drifted across the black. Sensors painted debris with ghostly outlines that glimmered and faded. A junior officer flinched when a body pinwheeled past the camera and then forced herself to keep calling ranges. Sarah wiped sweat from her neck with the back of her hand. Ammo, remaining, yellow. Heat margins trending ugly. Rotate barrels, Vale said. Keep the rhythm, not the rate. Around him, steel groaned like an animal. The bridge still stank of burned plastic and skin, but beneath that was the cleaner bite of the air scrubbers trying to win back the room. Someone passed bottled water hand to hand. Caps cracked, throats swallowed, hands shook. A dying destroyer's channel cut into the bridge without invitation. Captain Dorian, face blackened, lips bloody, stared into a scorched pickup. Behind him, flames licked the edge of a bulkhead, while crew crawled over each other toward a jammed hatch. "If you're hearing me," he said, voice shredded, "we held as long as the plates would let us. Tell my crew's families. Tell them their fathers and sons bought time that mattered." The feed went white, then black. No one spoke for several heartbeats. Vale bowed his head, then lifted it and set his jaw like an anvil. "Honor them by using what they gave us," he said to the ship. "Sarah, mark his position for recovery when we have it. Jonah, keep updating the list of targets that threaten life support and medical. If a shot doesn't save a throat from a blade, we don't take it." Around Luna, the soundless storm kept breaking. Coalition ships tried ad hoc fixes. Some switched to analog line-of-sight lights that blinked trench code from mastheads. Others launched small boats carrying couriers in mad dashes between cruisers. Those craft were brave and doomed. Gunners tracked them as they darted and sent them to rest by the dozen. On the display, entire task groups turned circles without intent, like soldiers who had lost the drum. Batra spoke again, hoarse from heat. "We're in cooldown. Coils will tolerate one more surge before we start losing chunks of the core. I need a long breath after that, or we take the array to a scrapyard in pieces." "We'll bank what we've bought," Vale said. "Holtz, if your line is still open, start cutting emergency supply corridors. Keep food and medicine flowing in arcs that our guns can guard." Holtz nodded once, eyes wet. "I can give you 3 corridors with military escorts. The assembly will scream about favoritism. Let them." Then he was gone, leaving only the hiss of tired fans and the steady call and answer of men who had learned each other's breathing. Sensors flagged a heavy cruiser rotating to bring a spinal weapon toward a habitation dome. Vale didn't wait. "Starboard battery 2, single volley, then cold. Fire." The shot flicked out like a knife thrown from a dark doorway. The cruiser's spine lit, then bent, then tore. Its weapon died unfired. "Contacts rising on the far side," Pike said, scanning fast. "Some of them are falling into planetary wells because engine timing won't catch. Others are limping into holding patterns. It's like the sky forgot its choreography." Vale felt it too. The shift, from organized malice to isolated fear. "That's our cue," he said. "We hold lanes. We protect hospitals and farms. We don't lunge for kills we don't need. Our job is not glory. It's survival measured in minutes that turn into hours." Rack's laugh came up from the tunnels, raw and strangely young. "You sound like my father counting rations after a flood," he said, firing a short burst that cut a drone in half. "Fine. We'll count bullets like bread." "Count lives," Vale said softer. "Bread follows." The bridge crew exhaled as one, ragged, relieved, terrified, alive. Men wiped grime from their faces with wrists and sleeves. A tech whose hands had been shaking set them flat on the console until the tremor passed, then went back to work. Outside, wreckage drifted in glittering trails that caught sunlight, then vanished into shade. The coalition's roar had become a scatter of hoarse voices. The first full pulse had not won a war, but it had cut the throat of an armada's song. "Update the board," Vale ordered. On the display, the crimson tide resolved into scattered knots. Each knot a problem, each lane a promise. "We move to the next phase. Isolated hulls only. Shoot to save, not to boast. And keep the array ready to speak again if they remember how to sing." "Take the carrier first. She's trying to angle toward the med dome," Vale barked. On Resolute's deck, the order landed like a thunderclap. Gunnery crews swung to their sights. Plasma barrels rotated, their coolant lines steaming against bulkheads that groaned under strain. The laser plasma display traced the carrier's swerving outline, its engines fluttering as if each was listening to a different drummer. The first volley went out in a staggered ripple. The carrier's flank blossomed with ruptured plating, molten fragments spiraled outward, catching stray sunlight before vanishing in shadow. Shouts rose in the bridge, not of triumph, but of grim acknowledgement. Another threat removed before it could spit fire on the helpless. Enemy cruiser peeling away, port vector. Looks like it's trying to regroup with escorts, Sarah reported, her voice low, eyes darting between shifting icons. Sweat trickled down her jawline. She wiped it with her sleeve, never looking away from the board. They're talking in light, Pike muttered, fingers sliding across his console. On the heads-up displays, enemy ships flashed bursts from their running lamps. Sharp pulses, crude symbols, frantic improvisation in a war stripped of digital tongues. Analog semaphore, just like old navies. Desperate but dangerous if they manage to chain it together. Can you cut it? Vale asked. I can scramble the rhythm, Pike said. He dragged his knuckles across the edge of his station, grounding himself, then tapped in a rotation sequence. I'll alter pulse intervals on the array's echoes. Their lights will read like stuttering ghosts to each other. Do it, Vale said. Another surge coursed outward. Enemy flashes bent into gibberish. Two destroyers attempted to form a screen, but misread signals sent them drifting into opposite arcs, leaving the carrier they'd meant to guard naked. Gunnery wasted no time. A single concentrated blast turned its bridge into shrapnel. Rask's channel cut in, jagged with the sound of automatic fire in the tunnels. Drones are pressing the shafts harder. They know they've lost the sky. Now they're hunting our heart. His breath came ragged. A muffled explosion shuddered through the comm. One of their saboteurs carried shaped charges. We stopped him at the coolant trunk, but they'll send more. Array is their new axis, Vale said. He felt the realization settle like ice in his chest. Jonah, any sign of coordinated push toward Shackleton's surface? Heads-up panels showed fractured signatures, small ships burning hard toward the lunar plane, not in formation, but with singular intent. Pike's eyes narrowed. Yes, sir. Scatter pattern. Every one of them angled for the array's heat wells. They've given up fleet duels. They want our throat. Holtz appeared again, his background filled with the chaotic churn of the assembly chamber. The sound of raised voices rolled like thunder behind him. They sense the array's the lever. If they break it, our resistance collapses. Commanders are shouting for evacuation contingencies. Vale slammed his hand on the console. Tell them evacuation is suicide. If we scatter, the coalition regroups. The array is the shield and the blade. We hold it, or Earth burns by morning. Holtz swallowed, then nodded. I'll stall them. Don't let that array go dark. Back on the bridge, gunners fired again. A frigate angled too close to a civilian ring. A rail burst sheared its midsection. Inside the dome, children in classrooms would never know how near death had passed above their sky. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. Ammo reserves dropping. We can't keep firing at every blip, Commander. Vale's gaze swept the displays. Then sharpen the knife. High value only. Anything less, let it drift. Protect domes, lifts, hospitals. Nothing else. Pike's console spat sparks. He cursed and kicked the panel until it steadied. Pulse pattern holding. But they're adapting fast. Some are switching to pure visual flags from viewports. Old cloth, actual banners, lashed to struts. We can't scramble those. Then we blind them differently, Vale said. Rask, you're our knife underground. What do you need? Bodies who can shoot straight, Rask growled. They're sending crawlers through ventilation shafts. I've got volunteers welding plates over some, but if one gets through to coil housing, all of this ends. Vale turned to his XO. Detach fire teams from the secondary dome defense. Funnel them to Rask. Double the guard at Shackleton's entrance locks. If the array falls, none of this matters. A junior lieutenant hesitated. Sir, if we pull men from the dome, civilians will panic. Vale's eyes hardened. Better they fear now than die later. Move. On the deck's far side, alarms shrilled. Pike shouted, multiple pods breaching lunar dust near the array's perimeter. Fast diggers, trying to tunnel straight into the cooling basins. Holtz's feed cut back in, more frantic. They're on the ground already. Tell your assembly they wanted a war of fleets, Vale said. Now it's knives in our ribs. This is where we either bleed out or stand. Rask's laughter rang, grim and sharp. Good, I like close work. Automatic fire cracked behind him. punctuated by men shouting, "Send them all! We'll make the tunnels their grave." On the bridge, the crew tightened their grips, eyes darting to displays showing dust plumes rising around Shackleton. The array's silhouette loomed, half cathedral, half weapon, glowing faintly as its coils cooled. Every officer felt the truth. The enemy had chosen the core, and if it fell, everything they had fought for dissolved. Vale leaned forward, voice carrying iron. "Hold your fire for what matters. Sharpen every blade. The coalition thinks blind ships can still cut us. Let's show them what sharp knives really do." The crew answered not with cheer, but with readiness. The sound of magazines slammed home, consoles reset, water bottles cracked open for parched throats, and helmets secured with trembling hands that steadied once they closed. Outside, enemy ships drifted like wounded beasts, but their smaller fangs had found a new target. The array waited, its coils glowing in the lunar dark, as the battlefield shifted from broken fleets to sabotage and shadow. And in that silence before the next surge, everyone aboard knew. The storm was far from over, and the enemy was learning to fight blind. "They're burning straight for the array gates. Pods in the dust!" shouted Sarah, her tone clipped, every syllable hammered with urgency. On the Resolute's bridge, heads-up displays flared red. Dozens of streaks stabbed downward from orbit, blazing trails as armored pods carved into the gray lunar crust. The impact tremors rattled Shackleton's perimeter sensors, shaking even the command chairs under Vale's boots. He didn't need the feeds to tell him. Enemy shock troops had arrived. "Rask, status!" Vale demanded into the comm. Static spat, then Rask's voice roared through the channel. "Pods cracking near south intake. We've already set trip lines. First wave walked into a grinder, but more are spilling out, and they're cutting through collapsed rubble like it's paper." Through the link came the rattle of rifle bursts, concussive thuds, the wet echo of close fighting in confined stone. Someone screamed. Rask shouted over it, "Hold the line, damn it! Keep!" The firing arcs tight. Then the channel clicked, leaving only battlefield chaos ringing in Vale's ear. He turned to Sarah. "Keep track of their burrow pattern. They'll try to split into multiple shafts to stretch us thin." "I've got seismic spikes everywhere," she answered, jaw tight. "The ground's alive with them. Feels like ants tunneling under the array." Batra's voice chimed in from Shackleton control, hoarse but unwavering. "Commander, my engineers are sealing doors with demo paste, repurposing fuel canisters as mines. Most of these people carried spanners yesterday, not rifles, but they're standing shoulder to shoulder, waiting to see if the charges they rigged will actually fire." Vale let that sink in. He imagined the faces of exhausted technicians, hands trembling as they wired explosives to bulkheads they'd built with care. Builders forced to become breakers. "Keep them together, Batra," he said quietly. "If fear scatters them, we lose the array without a fight." "Fear isn't the problem," Batra replied. "Rage is. Some lost families in orbit already. They'll tear into anything wearing the Coalition's colors." The deck beneath Vale shuddered with another impact. Pike's readouts showed fresh clusters slamming onto the crater rim, disgorging armored silhouettes. "They're not slowing down," Pike muttered, his knuckles whitening around the console. "These bastards are willing to bleed half their force to take that array." "Then they'll bleed," Vale said. His decision came sharp, immediate. "XO, you have the bridge. I'm going planetside." Heads turned. Sarah half rose from her station. "Sir, we need you here." "They need me there," Vale cut her off. "If the array falls, command ships mean nothing. CIC can run without me for a stretch. The tunnels can't." No one argued after that. He grabbed his sidearm, pulled on a pressure harness, and was already moving. The drop shuttle bucked as it hit lunar thin air, then hammered into Shackleton's landing bay. The air stank of lubricants, overheated circuits, and scorched lunar dust tracked in by fleeing workers. Vale disembarked into organized chaos. Engineers passing crates hand to hand, medics dragging bloodied miners, security troopers erecting barricades with welded scrap. "Commander on deck," someone called, and a ripple of stiffened spines answered. He pushed past salutes. "Save it for later. Where's the breach?" A corporal led him into a tunnel choked with smoke and ringing gunfire. The walls trembled from detonations. Further down, muzzle flashes stitched the dark, painting the stone in jagged light. Rask barreled out of the haze, armor scorched, a line of dust and blood across his forehead. "About time you showed up," Rask growled, though his grin was feral. "We've been stacking bodies like sandbags." Vale clasped his shoulder. "You hold, I reinforce." "Good," Rask spat. "They've got cutting charges chewing through bulkheads faster than we can collapse shafts. We kill one breach, another blossoms 3 corridors over." He shoved a grenade into a young sapper's hands. "Light the north vent if they crawl that way. Don't hesitate." The boy nodded, lips bloodless, and ran. A sudden quake rolled through the tunnel. Dust rained from the ceiling, coating tongues with bitterness. Down the shaft, an enemy pod cracked fully open, its hatch blown aside. A line of armored figures surged out, rifles blazing blue streaks that ricocheted sparks off stone. "Suppressing fire!" Rask bellowed. His team poured bullets into the breach. Echoes battered eardrums. Gunpowder sting burned nostrils. The flash seared eyes until the world blurred. Vale lifted his sidearm, squeezed, and one coalition trooper fell with half his visor shattered. "Demo charges now!" Rask's order cut through the thunder. 2 sappers slammed canisters into wall brackets, lit their cords, and ducked. The blast roared, collapsing the shaft entrance into a tangle of shattered rock. Screams were swallowed by the cave-in. For a moment, silence returned, broken only by panting lungs and the drip of fractured coolant pipes. Then another seismic jolt rolled beneath their boots. Sarah's distant voice came over comms. "Commander, more pods burrowing east. They're surrounding the array's intake vents." Vale looked at Rask, then toward the glow of Shackleton's inner chamber, where the array's coils thrummed like the heartbeat of Earth itself. He felt the weight settle. This wasn't holding anymore. It was survival. He raised his comm to all hands. "Every rifle, every spanner, every charge, we fight in the tunnels. The array is our spine. If it snaps, humanity collapses. You've seen what happens when their fleets falter. Let's show them what happens when ours refuse to." The cheer wasn't loud. It was grim, sharp, carried by people who had no illusions left. Gunbolts racked, welding torches sparked, demo wires tightened. Batra's engineers dug in, wiring fresh charges at choke points. Rask's soldiers planted trip mines. Vale tightened the strap of his harness, the stone walls close around him, carrying the vibrations of another incoming wave. In that moment, every sound sharpened. The scrape of boots on grit, the metallic snap of a magazine, the hiss of leaking airlines, the cough of a soldier choking dust, the distant clang of pickaxes as miners turned their tools to weapons. The enemy was in the regolith now, clawing toward the array's heart. The fight for Shackleton had become a knife duel underground, each shaft another artery to protect. And Vale, standing shoulder to shoulder with soldiers and sappers alike, knew he would not leave until either the array still stood or the tunnels closed over them all. "They're inside the ducts!" Rask's shout thundered over the comms, drowned by the staccato crack of rail rifles discharging at point-blank range. The tunnels lit with brutal flashes as slugs punched through steel ribs and flesh alike. Alarms wailed overhead, red strobes cutting across the haze. Each blink of light revealed shattered panels, drifting debris, and armored shadows forcing their way toward the array's inner chamber. Vale crouched behind a fractured conduit, the air hot with cordite and burning insulation. He tasted dust thick on his tongue, sharp as grit between his teeth. Soldiers beside him exchanged fire in suffocating bursts, rifles barking so loudly his eardrums throbbed. He leaned out, squeezing his sidearm, and watched a coalition trooper collapse, armor splitting under the strike. The body floated momentarily before gravity pulled it to the deck with a sickening thud. "Push them back before they reach the capacitors," Vale barked. His voice cracked but carried. Grenades clattered down the shaft. A corporal dove, dragging 2 conscripts behind a wall of broken plating. The blast ripped the duct open, leaving a sucking roar as air vented into blackness. The vacuum alarm shrieked, a shrill knife across the senses. Every chest tightened as pressure dipped, lungs straining until emergency shutters slammed shut with a teeth-rattling clang. From the array chamber, Batra's channel crackled alive. His voice was strained, guttural, like each word cost him a breath. "Commander, 3 of mine are gone. We isolated the overheated banks, but we had to crawl into the conduits barehanded. They burned through suits before we cut them off. If we hadn't, the surge would have melted the entire spine. The words dropped like stone inside Vale's gut. Faces he'd never know now ash on the circuits they protected. He swallowed grief and forced his tone steady. You bought us minutes, Batra. We'll use them. Gunfire rolled closer. One coalition trooper vaulted a barricade, swinging a blade like an executioner. Rask intercepted, slamming him back with the butt of his rifle, then riddling his torso until sparks burst from ruptured armor. He spat blood into the dust and turned toward Vale. They keep crawling through. Collapse the ducts, or we're corpses. Controlled demolition? Vale asked. Rask nodded grimly. We'll seal them in rubble, but anyone still down there won't crawl back out. The choice stabbed at Vale, but hesitation would kill them faster. He gave a sharp nod. Do it! Charges were placed under blistering fire. Rask and his sappers planted detonators along weakened struts, sparks raining as welders cut through beams. Coalition fighters pressed harder, sensing the trap. Rail slugs tore grooves across helmets. A soldier toppled, screaming with half his arm gone, and still the humans fought. Rask slammed the trigger. The tunnel convulsed with thunder. Walls collapsed inward, smothering the breach in stone and twisted alloy. The quake knocked men, sprawling, dust-choking throats until every cough cut raw. When silence returned, only muffled cries came from beneath the rock. The passage was sealed. For a heartbeat, relief coursed through the defenders. Then Sarah's voice pierced from orbit. Commander, system monitors show the array destabilizing. Output is flickering across multiple nodes. The next pulse won't hold form. Vale pressed his palm against the nearest bulkhead. He felt the vibration under his glove, like the trembling of a giant animal straining against a leash. The array was alive but wounded. If they fired now, it could falter, releasing energy in broken arcs, stripping away the deterrence they'd fought to preserve. He strode toward the central control dais. The chamber glowed with blinding blue veins from the conduits, each pulse irregular, erratic, the rhythm of a dying heart. Batra staggered near the banks, face gray with exhaustion, one sleeve burned to cinders. He raised his eyes to Vale. We can fire, Batra rasped, but if it's incomplete, their fleets will see through us. They'll know the array's crippled. And if we hold back, Vale demanded, then every hour they dig closer, and sooner or later they crack the spine open themselves. Either way, deterrence dies. The words hung heavy, buried under the weight of cost already paid. Vale glanced at Rask, who wiped grime from his brow with a bloody hand. We've bled every corridor for this thing. If it sputters when it fires, the men died for nothing. And if we push it past threshold? Sarah's voice broke in and through comms, sharpened by static. Overdrive risks cascading failure. The array might burn out permanently. That's our last card, gone forever. Vale stared into the veins of light coursing through the array, feeling the heat prick his skin, hearing the strained whine of conduits at the edge of rupture. The choice coiled in front of him like a blade with two edges. One promised weakness, the other destruction. Both paths carried annihilation. Rask leaned close, speaking low so only he could hear. Commander, the men will follow whatever you choose, but they need to believe it means something. If you gamble, you'd better not flinch. Vale exhaled, tasting ash on the recycled air. Every sound around him seemed sharpened. The hiss of scorched panels cooling, the drip of condensation from fractured pipes, the ragged breathing of survivors bracing for his word. He lifted his comm, voice firm despite the turmoil clawing his chest. All hands, this is Vale. We stand at the edge. The array is bleeding, but so are we. The enemy thinks breaking into these ducts broke us. They're wrong. We still hold the spine, and with it, the choice. We will fire again. How we fire, that's decided now. Around him, soldiers stilled. Sappers paused. Even wounded men leaned on rifles to listen. Every gaze anchored on him. Batra whispered, almost pleading, Commander, give the order. Vale stared at the laser plasma display flickering above the dais, the data streams painting erratic lines of energy flux. His hand hovered over the console, sweat chilling against his glove. He could call for a measured pulse, risking exposure, or push the system into redline and trust it to hold. The moment stretched, each breath heavier than the last. He thought of the crews lost in orbit, of the engineers who died shielding the capacitors, of the miners turned sappers fighting in smoke-choked shafts. Their sacrifices demanded not survival alone, but a statement to every coalition ship still watching. His throat tightened, but he forced the words out. Prepare the array for... The sentence cut off in the roar of the conduits flaring brighter, the chamber filling with unsteady light as the system strained toward the decision none of them could avoid. The choice now belonged to him, measured strike or overdrive, deterrence or final gamble. And as the array's glow licked across every exhausted face in Shackleton, the future of Earth hung on which button his finger pressed. Cut the safeties, Vale said, the words leaving his throat like shards of stone. He stood before the plasma console, every gauge trembling near the red line. Around him the chamber thrummed with unstable power. Rising heat warped the air, vents rattled, coolant hissed from ruptured seams. Batra's soot-caked face whipped toward him. You're authorizing overclock? Commander, that means gutting everything else tethered to this array. Mars relay, legacy nets, even the orbital grids. We'll blind our own colonies. Vale's jaw flexed. Better blind and alive than lit and enslaved. Do it. For a heartbeat, the room froze. Then, like a storm breaking, engineers and conscripts lunged into action. Fingers flew across boards, sealing bulkheads, rerouting circuits, yanking fuses with sparks biting skin. The air filled with a copper tang as conduits blistered under the load. Sarah's voice from orbit cut in, sharp as shrapnel. Commander, if you dump station reserves, we lose comms to the Martian shield grids. They'll think we're abandoning them. Tell them nothing, Vale said flatly. The silence will keep them safer than words. Rask leaned against a scorched pillar, rifle still in hand, his eyes hard. If this fails, Commander, we'll have killed our own lifelines for nothing. Vale's gaze didn't flinch. If it fails, there won't be lifelines left to kill. The array's veins of light shifted from fractured blue to blinding white, arcs racing like serpents across the spine. Capacitors screamed, floor plates buckled, and every hair on every arm rose as static built. Timing is everything, Batra rasped, hunched over the boards, sweat streaking the grime on his face. We surge across the bands at staggered intervals, or the signal collapses into noise. I'll thread it. You'll do more than thread it, Vale said. You'll punch it across every relay from Luna to Kuiper. We need the pulse to leave Sol entirely. Batra nodded, then barked at his crew. Synchronize on my mark. Cut the old nets. Feed every watt into the lattice. Legacy channels die now. The sacrifice landed like a funeral bell. Screens dimmed, comm relays winked out. Voices from Mars, Ganymede, and Titan went dead in the space of breaths. The silence pressed thick on every chest, like hearing a family cry out one moment and vanish the next. Rask muttered, We just severed our own limbs. Better than letting them cut out our heart, Vale shot back. On the boards, indicators whirled into alignment. Batra slammed the final lever. Overdrive engaged. The array howled. Light poured from every seam, bathing the chamber in searing brilliance. Vibrations rolled through Shackleton like a living quake. Men staggered, teeth rattling, ears splitting as the system bent physics to its will. Multi-band initiation, Batra roared. His crew counted in overlapping shouts. 1, 2, 3. Each number marking a new band firing in sequence. Through the displays, Vale saw it. Energy braiding into patterns, coiling through relay physics first mapped generations ago. The pulse leapt outward, climbing from lunar relays into Kuiper nodes, twisting across frozen arcs where no human eye would ever see. Beyond Sol, captured beacons lit like lighthouses chained together by invisible fire. The chamber shook, dust cascading from ceilings, pipes bursting. Rask caught a collapsing beam with raw arms to save 2 engineers scrambling beneath. Every breath seared lungs, the air shimmering with radiant heat. Then the external feed lit up. The laser plasma display showed the impossible. Coalition fleets across Sol flickering into silence. Icons once blazing with enemy chatter winked out one by one, mute as tombstones. Ships hung adrift, powerless, their coordination dead. And further still, the pulse propagated outward, racing into galactic dark. Distant sectors collapsed into blackout. Empire nets scrambled, commands severed. Fleets froze mid-maneuver, engines throttled back without orders. On the display, enemy formations dissolved like sandcastles under tide. Sarah's voice carried a tremor, awe slipping past military control. Commander, it worked. They're blind. Entire empires are standing down. The silence that followed was deafening, not of machines but of war itself. The relentless pressure, the pounding surge of orders and counter-orders, the suffocating noise of invasion, all gone, replaced by absence vast enough to feel like a physical wound. Batra slumped against the console, his hands still on the levers. He whispered, "We burned everything for this. Earth holds. For now." Rask spat black grit from his mouth, glaring at the blanked enemy feed. "We broke their teeth, but the galaxy won't forgive us for taking its voice." Vale stood unmoving, eyes locked on the display where enemy empires flickered into enforced quiet. His chest ached, not from smoke or strain, but from the knowledge of what came next. "We silence them today," he said, voice steady, carved from exhaustion and iron. "Tomorrow they'll scream louder than ever. Let them. When they come, they'll remember we chose overdrive." The array's light dimmed, sinking back into ember glow. Shackleton's defenders stood in the wreckage, ears ringing, hearts pounding, every sense aware that though they had survived, they had also set the galaxy on fire. The immediate offensive was gone, but so was the balance of order. They had won, by tearing silence across the stars. "Pull the guns offline. We are finished firing," Vale ordered, his tone flat but edged with finality. The command room reeked of scorched wiring, hot coolant, and sweat-soaked uniforms. Laser plasma displays glared red with system faults. Yet every officer paused to glance at him. His words meant something had ended. Rask's eyes narrowed. "You're calling it? We've still got stragglers out there." "They're drifting," Vale answered. "Their admirals are gone mute. Their formations shattered. They fear another surge. Pursuit will only bleed us for scraps. Stand the batteries down." The room quieted, the distant percussion of rail cannons ceasing across Shackleton's defensive lines. Outside, cislunar space looked like a graveyard. Cruisers spun helplessly, hulls torn open to reveal skeletal ribs. Cargo trains smashed together in silent chain reactions. Fields of glittering fragments swept across orbits, catching sunlight like rivers of broken glass. From the medbay level came an urgent cry over intercom. "Overflow! We've got casualties stacked in corridors. We're out of triage beds." Vale shut his eyes briefly. He could still feel the array's overdrive echoing in his chest, the ache of the decision that silenced entire empires. Opening them again, he said, "Rask, establish recovery corridors. Safe lanes through debris. Civilians, shuttles, anyone still alive in those wrecks. We pull them back before power fails." Rask snapped his jaw tight, nodded, and turned to his squad officers. Orders spread like wildfire. Recovery teams, combat engineers, explosive ordnance crews. The battle shifted from killing to saving. In docking bays, loaders screeched as they lifted stretchers. Burned miners and shattered techs were laid in rows. The stench of seared insulation clung to uniforms. Medics moved with frantic efficiency, slicing open pressure suits, pumping air into collapsed lungs. A nurse shouted for saline, while another cursed as the bags came back empty. On Luna, power grids flickered, entire domes dimming to half light. Families huddled under waning glow lamps, children clutching each other as warmth bled from habitation walls. "Ration heat," the announcements droned. "Reserve all current for hospitals." The brownouts cut deep, elevators stalled mid-ascent, greenhouses wilted, hydroponic farms fell silent. Batra stumbled into CIC, his coveralls blackened and one sleeve burned away. His voice rasped like gravel. "Capacitor banks are gone. Ammunition lines are at redline. If the coalition turns back now, we won't have shells for another stand." "They won't turn back yet," Vale said, His voice carried, steady but heavy, as though he spoke to himself as much as to his officers. They've seen what overdrive does. They'll peel away, regroup, whisper to their masters about the silence we forced on them. On the displays, icons representing enemy flotillas edged away, some stuttering in chaotic retreat, others drifting without fuel. Rask smirked bitterly. Look at them scatter, like wolves suddenly afraid of the dark. Fear keeps them from charging again, Vale said. Let it. We don't chase them into the dark. We dig our dead out of it. The shift in orders spread outward. Gun crews who had been locked on triggers unclipped their restraints and ran to help search and rescue detachments. Drone operators repurposed their craft from targeting pods to scanning lifeboats. Instead of firing solutions, their consoles lit with beacon pings from stranded crew capsules. In the debris field, SAR pilots threaded needle paths between spinning wreckage. One cutter nosed alongside a shattered destroyer, floodlights glancing off jagged plating. A voice crackled through comms. Heat signature in aft compartment, 3 still breathing. Grappling arms clamped, and divers in patched suits cut through twisted hull to drag survivors free. Their muffled screams carried even through helmets as torn suits were patched mid-vacuum. An explosion boomed in lunar orbit as unstable munitions in a drifting barge detonated. The blast flung shards in every direction, rattling against Shackleton's shields. Vale barked at once, EOD to outer perimeter. Map every hot fragment before it cooks another lane. Hours bled together. Rescue crews pulled men and women out, but they also zipped black bags, stacking them by the hundreds. Engineers returned with burns across their faces. Every corridor echoed with groans and shouted medical codes. At last, Sarah leaned against her console, fatigue hollowing her eyes. Enemies gone. Last formation cleared burn range. We hold. Rask exhaled and sat heavily, rubbing grime from his eyelids. We hold. But at what cost? Hospitals overflowing, magazines dry, power failing. Vale's gaze swept the chamber. Officers slumped in chairs, their uniforms shredded, their voices hoarse. The array still glowed faintly under his feet, drained but not dead. We hold because we did not waste ourselves chasing glory, he said. We hold because we pulled our people back instead of throwing them into fire. That is how we survived the long silence we just made. Silence fell across the command center. Not the dead hush of battle, but the strained quiet of men and women who had nothing left to give tonight. In that stillness, Shackleton Station floated among drifting hulks and fractured fleets. For the first time in days, no railgun thundered, no torpedo trail streaked. Only wreckage turning slowly, like frozen storms around the moon. In the minds of every survivor, one thought lingered. The galaxy was listening to silence now, and wondering what came next. Begin the roll, Vale said. Throat scraped raw, palms pressed flat against the lectern to keep them from shaking. The memorial hall had been a storage bay yesterday. Now the lights were dimmed to a soft amber and a laser etcher crawled across a wall of dark basalt, carving letters that threw pale sparks into the air. Marines lined the aisles in dress blacks, boots polished but scuffed at the toes from fighting in dust. Families and shipmates filled the rows, the quiet broken by coughs, stifled sobs, the distant clink of med stretchers passing the door. The air carried antiseptic bite and the warm, tired smell of too many bodies in recycled atmosphere. Vale tasted copper where a cut on his lip had reopened, and salt where he'd licked it closed. An adjutant handed him a slate. Ready, sir. He looked down. Name swam. He blinked, steadied his breathing, and read so the whole hall could hear. Captain Dorian Hale, Horizon Pike. He blocked a firing lane with his own hull so a hospital ring could live. The etcher hissed, and the name appeared in clean strokes. Chief Technician Leo Marine. He crawled into a live conduit so our coils wouldn't melt. He did not come back out. Another line burned into stone. Private A.O. Banner. He held North Vent alone for 80 seconds. His squad made it through the door because he did not. He kept going. Gunnery mates, shuttle pilots, miners who had put down wrenches and picked up rifles, a janitor who died when an internal hatch jammed, and he forced it with a crowbar so strangers could pass. For each, he added a sentence that put a life into the hall, favorite jokes, a dog-eared book always in a pocket, a habit of leaving extra coffee in the pot at shift change. The wall grew crowded. Stone dust hung in the light like a fine snow. When he drew breath, it coated his tongue, chalky and bitter. Major Rask stepped forward when it was time, his voice rough but steady. "Marines," he said, "honors." The rifles lifted and snapped down in a slow, deliberate salute. No blanks to fire, no ceremony beyond the movement itself. Men bowed their heads. The only music came from the faint rasp of the etcher, laying memory into rock. When the hall emptied, Vale stayed. He traced the letters with the back of his fingers, feeling the shallow grooves under skin gone numb from too many cold hours in the tunnels. "I will write to each family," he murmured. "You can dictate, sir," the adjutant said gently. "I'll write," Vale repeated. He did not move until the last line cooled. Chief Engineer Batra waited outside, coveralls split at the shoulder, forearms bandaged. "Come see the spine," he said, and led the way into the array vault. Heat still bled from the machinery. Cables sagged like ropes after a storm. Their insulation bubbled, copper bright where the shell had split. The coil housings had slumped into strange, glassy shapes, fusing in places like candle wax hardened by a draft. The floor vibrated with a low, grinding ache that crawled up Vale's legs and settled behind his knees. Batra palmed open a panel and showed the core. "That's it," he said. "We salvaged what we could for later study. The rest is a sculpture, not a tool. You asked for truth." He touched the fused windings with a gloved knuckle. "Truth is, this was one use. We burned the heart to save the body." Vale held his breath, then let it out slowly. "Could it be rebuilt? Not with what we have. These alloys took decades to source, and the old tolerances lived in the heads of dead men. Even if we had the metals, the timing grid that made it sing is slag. We turned a cathedral into a tomb." Vale nodded once. The honesty landed hard and clean, like a blade placed handle first in his hand. "Then we moved to the next fight." "Which is?" Batra asked. "Belief," Vale said. They found Jonah Pike hunched over a bank of laser plasma displays and signals, eyes bloodshot, skin pale under grime. He looked up with the jittery energy of a man who had skipped sleep for too many rotations. "I've started the ghost work," he said before Vale could speak. "Telemetry packages that mimic readiness cycles. They show charge ladders rising, cooldowns falling, like a living system. We can broadcast heartbeat squibs on a schedule that looks deliberate, but never tips into full activation. Anyone listening will think the array can speak again." Batra crossed his arms. "You're forging a mask out of data and timing." Pike's mouth twitched. "We don't need a body if the shadow scares them. I'll route decoy pings through mothballed relay nodes we can claim our calibration checks. Empty shells can still ring like bells if you hit them in the right place." Vale leaned on the rail. "Compartmentalize. Tight circle. Anyone outside this room hears a single line. Maintenance cycles under supervision. The less that's said, the longer the lie lives." Pike tapped at a panel, and the room filled with a soft series of beeps. Short, then long, then a cluster. The founder's grammar had rhythms. Our earlier pulse mimicked their nested structures. If I trickle harmless echoes in that same cadence, analysts from a dozen empires will tell their admirals the monster is stirring. Vale caught the younger man's wrist before he could hit send. "We never say stirring on a channel. Again," he said quietly, "we say calibrated standby, and only when asked." The heads-up display on the wall flickered to life with Admiral Holtz's face. He looked 10 years older than yesterday. Lines carved trenches down his cheeks. His eyes were red around the rims. "The assembly needs a statement," he said without preamble. "Commerce is dead quiet. Outer colonies are frightened. Allies and enemies both keep asking the same thing. Is the array armed?" Vale glanced at Pike, then back to Holtz. "Here's your line. The array is on calibrated standby under restricted protocols to prevent collateral harm while deorbit debris is cleared and humanitarian corridors are maintained. Repeat those phrases. If pressed, refer queries to signals for non-operational briefs. And make sure those briefs say nothing." Holtz exhaled, shoulders sagging. "They'll accuse us of posturing." "They already do," Vale said. "Our job is not to soothe them. It's to shape their next choice. If they think we can speak again at any moment, they'll keep distance and treaty talk will suddenly feel attractive. If they learn we cannot, we'll be fielding incursions before we have bandages for today's wounds. Holtz rubbed at his temple. And if someone inside leaks the truth, Pike answered before Vale could. We mask the truth even from our own. Only 4 of us see the core as it stands. My team gets compartmented slices. The packages build themselves from macros they think are diagnostics. If someone talks, all they can describe is routine static. Batra shifted, guilt and admiration at war in his eyes. I buried men under this thing, he said, voice tight. Lying about its strength tastes like ash. Then think of it as armor, Vale replied. They died buying this quiet. Our job is to keep it from ending tomorrow because we were honest to the wrong ears. Holt straightened a little. I'll carry the line. Calibrated standby. You'll give me a timetable for humanitarian corridors? Already moving, Vale said. Search and rescue, explosive ordnance disposal, and deconfliction crews are clearing lanes. Tell governors that food freight has priority. Put a minister on every shuttle if it helps the cameras. Holtz managed a thin smile. It will. The feed winked out. Pike stared at his screens, then at Vale. I'll seed the decoys and keep the cadence irregular enough to seem alive. Good, Vale said. Don't grow clever. Predictable lies last. He left signals and walked the corridor alone. The floor vibrated under his boots with the faint, tireless labor of pumps and fans. Through a viewport, he saw the memorial wall again. Smaller now. Names bright while the stone still cooled. A child touched a letter with one finger and looked up at a tired father who nodded without speaking. Vale pressed his palm to the glass and felt its chill. When he returned to the vault one last time that shift, Batra was sitting on an upturned crate, staring at the fused heart of the array. Never thought I'd build something meant to talk to the sky and spend the end of it telling the sky we still can, the engineer said softly. You didn't build a lie, Vale told him. You built time. We're painting a warning across it. Outside, wreckage still turned over the moon, and distant fleets held their distance, listening for a voice that would not come. Inside, a wall of names cooled, and men who had held tunnels with bleeding hands tried to sleep. Signals began their careful drumbeat, a story told to predators so they would think twice before hunting at the door. Perception for now was the strongest shield Earth owned, and Vale intended to keep it raised until the living could stand beneath it without shaking. Read it out loud, demanded Assembly Chairwoman Ibarra, her voice cracking like a whip across the chamber. The amphitheater, carved into lunar stone and ringed with laser plasma displays that washed the room in stark blue light, fell silent. Dust motes swirled in the beams above the delegates' heads. The smell of warm circuitry and recycled air clung to every breath. Officers, ministers, envoys, all turned their attention toward the central podium, where Admiral Holtz gripped a slate with both hands, his knuckles pale. He cleared his throat. By majority vote, the Terran Assembly moves to adopt the signal doctrine. No forward deployments will occur without certified isolation capacity. Every vessel leaving Sol will carry hardened optical isolators. Any fleet commander acting outside these terms will be relieved and recalled. His tone cut like ice, but the tremor in his jaw betrayed exhaustion. The chamber erupted, voices colliding, chairs scraping, translators stuttering to keep up. Some cheered, others slammed fists against desks. The clatter echoed into the high dome until Ibarra slammed her gavel. Quiet! From the back row, Pike muttered to Batra, We're writing law on the bones of a bluff. Batra rubbed his burned forearm, still raw under bandages. Bluff or not, it buys time. Holtz continued. Force design will follow Earth-native architectures, standard templates. Every ship built from this day forward will anchor on local supply chains. No dependency on orbital nets that can be severed. No reliance on alien calibrations. We standardize, or we perish. Murmurs ran through the chamber like wind through leaves. Some delegates nodded vigorously, while others whispered of cost, of delays, of colonies left exposed. Vale finally stood. He had been quiet since the roll of names, carrying the weight of each one carved into the wall. Now his voice carried with steady gravity. You saw what happened when the array sang, Our enemies saw it too. They will spend lifetimes wondering if we can sing again. Let them wonder. But while they question, we must shape the silence. That means doctrine, ships that cannot be silenced by the wrong switch, and decoys that keep predators guessing. Ibarra raised a hand. Explain decoys, Admiral. Pike straightened, the shadows under his eyes deeper than ever. We scatter false arrays across controlled sectors, hollow towers anchored into rock or orbit, each rigged to throw controlled microbursts on open bands. Neutral monitors will catch them. Rivals will debate endlessly. Was that a real stir or a staged calibration? They will watch phantoms while our true core heals. A delegate from Ceres banged her fist. You'll invite escalation. They'll send scouts to test these phantoms. Good, Pike shot back. Let them waste ships on shadows. Every scout they burn in doubt is one less frigate hovering over Earth. Holtz lifted the slate again. Diplomacy accompanies posture. Back channels will carry terms to all fronts. No massing of fleets near Seoul. Inspectable quarantine lanes for trade and relief. Any violation means the doctrine activates without debate. At that, silence returned. Delegates shifted uneasily, papers rustling. The doctrine was no longer abstract. It meant blockade enforcement, boarding rights, the possibility of open fire. Vale broke the quiet. Fear is our ally, but it cannot stand alone. We convert fear into distance, lasting, measured, enforceable distance. This is not conquest, it is survival. If that means frightening the stars for another century, then so be it. Ibarra's gavel struck. The doctrine stands. Carve it into charter. The sound lingered in the chamber like an iron bell. Hours later, the war room lit with red markers on a star chart. Engineers drafted schematics for isolators, their screens filled with diagrams of light paths, shutters, and shields. Fabricators reported alloy shortages. Officers bickered over convoy schedules. Amid the chaos, Pike leaned against a railing, staring at the ghostly constellations projected overhead. We're gambling with mirrors, he whispered. Vale joined him, arms crossed. Mirrors by shadows, shadows by space. That's enough. On the far side of the room, Batra argued with logistics officers over power grids. Sweat streaked his temple. You want optical isolators on every hull? Then triple my copper allotments. Otherwise, you're fitting ships with decorations, not shields. The officers balked at his bluntness. Vale simply nodded. Give him what he needs. A doctrine written on paper means nothing if the welds split under strain. Through the viewport, Earth hung in darkness. Cities dim under rationed grids. Relief barges crawled outward like fireflies, their wakes glittering faintly. A convoy peeled off toward Mars, carrying food, medicine, and officials eager to soothe panic. Cameras would show ministers comforting children in shelters, while in backrooms, Pike's decoy burst would ripple across neutral monitors, fueling speculation in every embassy across the galaxy. By the third rotation, news feeds lit with reactions, distant empires pausing maneuvers, some fleets drifting back to safe harbors. Traders complained of delays but whispered relief at lanes being guarded by Marines rather than left exposed. Refugees from outer colonies cheered when escort cutters greeted them with new isolator frames bolted to their hulls. Fear was bending into structure. In the assembly mess that night, delegates ate in weary silence. The food smelled of boiled grain and tin trays, but for the first time since the array's firing, laughter rose from one corner. A cluster of Marines clinked mugs, swapping stories of comrades whose names now shone on stone. Vale sat apart, pen scratching across paper, letters to families. The ink smudged where his wrist brushed the page, but he did not stop. Each line a promise kept. Holtz entered quietly, setting a tray beside him. They're calling it credible, he said. Across every channel, credible. That word alone is keeping fleets away. Vale set down the pen, flexed his cramped fingers, and stared at the stack of unfinished pages. Then the doctrine lives, not because they trust us, but because they doubt us. Holtz gave a short laugh. Doubt can be stronger than faith. Vale's gaze drifted to the viewport, where Earth turned slowly, scarred yet alive. He whispered as much to himself as to anyone listening. Let them circle. Let them question, so long as they do it from a distance. The doctrine was ink on paper, but also steel in hulls, light in false bursts, whispers in hidden channels. It was fear sculpted into law, bluff carved into ritual, and as long as it held, humanity could breathe. "Put me under oath," Vale said, stepping to the dais with a cracked lip and a uniform that still carried dust from the tunnels. The chamber clerk lifted a worn booklet, read the formula, and Vale raised his right hand. "I swear to account for every life and every order." Admiral Holtz leaned forward at the committee table. "Commander, the Assembly needs your judgment recorded. Was overdrive necessary?" Vale's voice carried across stone and steel. "It was. We severed our own lines. We darkened Mars. We burned stations that took decades to build. We did these things because the alternative was our children sheltering under a sky filled with someone else's ships. I won't sell you a fairy tale. We are not untouchable. We do not have 10 arches hidden under the dust. We have one lesson and the courage to act before fear smothers it." The hearing room stilled. Vale continued, hands braced on the rail. "Our fleets are not larger than theirs. Our weapons are not stronger. We survive because we recognize the one thing they were sure we wouldn't do: reach into the code that knits their war together and break it. I will not let that become legend. It was a decision with a cost, and the cost has names." He read the figures without flinching. Destroyers lost, crews missing, engineers dead in conduits, miners who never returned from the shafts. Then he folded the page and met the committee's eyes. "Those names are the reason the doctrine stands. We will fight as islands when we must. We will wire light through glass instead of cable. We will keep distance between any forward screen and the systems that feed our homes. That is not bravado. It's basic survival written into law." Holt spoke softly. "And if they come again?" "They will come again when their fear cools," Vale said. "By then our ships will be built to stand alone. Our families will understand drills, and our neighbors will think twice because we taught them how easily a chorus can lose its conductor." When he left the chamber, the corridors outside were crowded with aides and couriers carrying stamped orders. Back-channel messages had moved all night. Reports landed on his desk. Coalition commanders recalled to their borders. Punitive patrols redirected to old feuds. Scouts ordered to keep 3 light hours from Seoul. The quarantine lanes he and Holtz had proposed flickered alive. Escort cutters parking at waypoints, transponders checked, cargo holds inspected, relief barges waved through with food and medical crates. Rivals grumbled on public channels and agreed off the record. Distance at last had a shape. Pike arrived with a slate tucked under his arm, eyes rimmed red. "Decoys are singing 3 sectors out. Short bursts, open bands. Neutral stations are already arguing about authenticity. Some say we're taunting them. Some say we're hiding something worse." "Let them argue," Vale said. "Noise is a kind of fence." Batra followed, sleeves rolled to show tape burns. "We've begun stripping the erased salvage. Anything that can teach us without risking a spark goes to a locked lab. Coil housings stay where they are. They've fused into the pillars like bones. You'll lead the team that writes the manual for what never happens again," Vale said. "I want a checklist, 1,000 items long before anyone in this system touches a core like that." On Luna, scaffolds rose around broken docks. Welders cut new plates while cranes swung containers of soil for the farms that had wilted during the brownouts. The air tasted of antiseptic in the medical rings, of coffee boiled too long in the mess, of hot oil where generators finally caught. In a training yard carved from bedrock, Rask's Marines drilled with small teams and clipped radios, practicing the kind of fighting that survives when command goes quiet. They moved like men who had learned to breathe between explosions. Vale watched a squad advance down a painted corridor, each man covering 2 angles and trusting the next set of boots to catch the blind corner. Rask spotted him and walked over, helmet under his arm. "You don't need me to tell you they'll test. Our lines again," Rask said. "They'll send raiders who think our silence was a fluke." "We'll teach those raiders that our silence is a choice," Vale answered, "and that it's expensive for anyone who doubts it." That evening, Vale finished the last letters. Ink stained his fingers. Each salutation felt like hefting a weight he could not set down anywhere but a family's kitchen table. He wrote about courage without lying about violence. He included a memory for every name that had passed his lips in the memorial hall. For Captain Hale, a line about the way he tapped two knuckles on a console before every jump. For Chief Marin, a note about the missing fingernail he joked was donated to the moon. He signed the final letter and sat back, the room quiet except for the dull clatter of meal trays out in the corridor. A runner from Signals paused at the door. "Sir, one more thing. An enemy scout clipped the quarantine lane near Lagrange 4. Our cutter pinged them and held fire. They backed away without protest." "Log it," Vale said. "Send thanks to the cutter's captain for having steady hands." The next morning, a small group met at the vault. Holtz, Batra, Pike, Rask, two assembly clerks with lacquered cases, and Vale. The door's heavy ring bore fresh scratches where debris had gouged it during the battle. Dust lay thick in the grooves of the floor. No one spoke as Batra keyed the panel and swung the door inward. The chamber beyond was quiet, lit by work lamps that threw hard edges on machinery that no longer moved. The array's heart sat in the center like a relic recovered from a burned temple. Fused windings glinted dully. A hairline crack ran through one support, black against the pale shell. Vale felt heat radiating faintly through his boots. Memory more than energy. Holtz took a folded sheet from one of the clerks and read, voice steady. "By order of the Terran Assembly and under the Signal Doctrine, this device is declared inert and inviolate. No person will attempt reactivation except upon Assembly vote and existential threat certification. Violation constitutes treason." The clerk opened a lacquered case. Inside lay a key made of simple steel and a red wax seal. Old symbols for a new law. Vale accepted both, their weight cool in his palm. He walked to the locking bar, slid the key home, and turned it. The bar seated with a firm clunk that echoed against the walls. He pressed the seal to the wax plate, lifted it, and the imprint shone bright. Rask broke the silence. "Feels like burying a friend. Or closing a door before a child wanders into a furnace," Batra said. Pike looked from the lock to Vale. "If they ever force that vote, you know what it means." "It means everything else failed," Vale said. "I intend to keep everything else working." They stepped back and the door came down, hydraulics sighing, bolts sliding home with a heavy finality. Vale placed his palm on the cold ring for a heartbeat, then lowered his hand. "Under oath and law," he said, to the people behind him and to the empty corridor. Outside the vault, life resumed its rough rhythm. Freight rattled over rails toward farms and clinics. Children chased each other down narrow corridors where welders had chalked cartoon suns to distract them during outages. In the yard, Marines adjusted straps and laughed at jokes that only made sense to men who had breathed dust and smoke together. None of it was triumphant. All of it was real. Weeks later, a courier packet arrived with summaries from a dozen embassies. Coalition states had resumed old quarrels. A border skirmish near a gas giant ended with a hurried ceasefire when both sides whispered about the signal. Traders reported that escorts from rival houses treated Seoul with the caremen reserved for an unexploded shell. Fear had turned into caution, and caution into distance. The doctrine held. On a rare quiet night, Vale walked to the observation gallery carved near the rim. The glass felt cool beneath his fingertips. Earth turned below, lights coming back city by city. A maintenance crew worked on a lantern over the walkway. The smell of hot solder drifted on the recycled air. Boots clicked behind him. Holtz stopped beside him, hands in his coat pockets. "You wrote every letter?" Holtz asked. "Every one," Vale said. "Do you believe the story we're telling the stars will hold?" "It will hold because we keep living it," Vale answered. "We won't crow about victory. We'll rebuild, drill, escort convoys, and count ammunition. We'll keep decoys whispering. We'll keep the oath on that door." Holtz nodded. "The war is over then." "It is," Vale said. "And the peace is the kind you tend like a field. You miss a day and weeds take it back." They stood without speaking. The glass fogged slightly where their breath met the cold. Vale thought of the title he would never say aloud, the story that had begun it all. A single signal left the moon, and every power that thought itself unassailable learned silence. Not magic, not destiny. A choice made with eyes open, owned to the end. Tomorrow he would return to rosters, budgets, training blocks, and shipping schedules. Tonight he allowed himself 1 minute for the dead, one for the living, and one for the door that would stay shut until the world truly needed it. Then he turned away from the gallery and walked back into lighted corridors filled with work. Earth had survived not by mass or noise, but by daring to use the one edge that frightened its enemies more than death. That was enough. If this story lit a fire in you, hit that subscribe button for more thrilling HFY missions. Now we want to hear from you. If you held the Founder's Code, would you use it to shield Earth, to mislead every rival fleet, or to bring their war machine down for good? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. Thanks for watching Stellar HFY, where survival turns into strategy and strategy reshapes the stars. See you in the next story.